Great, thank you. Great, well, thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm Robin Sylvester, and I'm the Director of the Grant Office for the UIC School of Public Health. Searching for grant funding is something that I do every week or sometimes every day, and I'm excited to share some of the information that I thought would be helpful for those that are just getting started. We should have time for questions at the end of the presentation, but feel free to put those in the chat as we go along. Next slide. So the session is organized into 4 sections: sources of grant funding, finding the right fit for your funding needs and organization, grant search tools, and then we'll touch on some of the applicant requirements that are common or good to know before applying for grants. To get started, I like to think of grant funding under 2 separate umbrellas. So first, government funding, which includes all levels of government, and then non-governmental funding, which includes funding from nonprofits, foundations, or for-profit or private sources. Next slide. So when I'm searching for government grants, I'm often focused on federal grants, but it's also good to remember that all levels of government offer grants, including state and local governments. In general, state and local government grants are going to benefit the geographic areas that they serve. Next slide. So sometimes government grants are offered at one level of government, such as the state or local level, but they originated at the federal level. So these funds are sometimes referred to as pass-through funding. Often state and local agencies are obligated to spend these funds within a certain period of time, which affects the timelines for applications, awards, and funding periods. Many of these pass-through grants pass along requirements from the original funding source to the grantee. This is good to know so that applicants can be prepared in advance to fulfill the applicant requirements. Next slide. So this slide outlines some of the common characteristics of government grants. First, government grants are usually offered and coordinated by a specific department or agency with a specific focus. For example, the CDC focuses on health issues. In addition, state and local governments often redistribute federal funds through their departments related to the original funding agency. So it's important to get to know the agencies that work in your programmatic area and investigate whether they have information on their websites about available grants or their grant-making process. So for example, I work for the School of Public Health, so I might spend some time searching for grants and grant-related information on the CDC website or the Illinois Department of Public Health websites, while my colleague who works for a nonprofit interested in green infrastructure might spend more time on the EPA or Illinois EPA website searching for grants. Government funding is offered as either a grant or a contract. However, it's important to understand that both of these funding methods require the grantee to fulfill the deliverables or activities promised in their grant applications or bids. So grant funds are not gifts or donations, and they must support a specific scope of work or program. It's also important to understand that government grants must comply with many rules and often have rigorous reporting requirements because they are funded by tax dollars. So government agencies need to report on the use of funds and ensure that they are spent as intended. A good way to learn more about government grants is by researching previously awarded grants. So you can search all federal grants on the website usaspending.gov. Next slide, please. So this is a quick screenshot of the search page on usaspending.gov. An example of one search might be to filter for the last completed fiscal year. So that would be fiscal year 23. Select award type, grant, and grant type, grants and cooperative agreements. So cooperative agreements are grants with greater involvement from agency staff. Then add a location that you're interested in, such as Cook County. And once you apply the filters and search, you can use the links to view individual grant information or the tabs to view a summary by funding agency or a map. So I find this search interesting for a geographic area such as Cook County to see what agencies are making the most grants in our area. And I can also, I believe, limit the search to the type of recipient. So for me, I'm looking at universities. I can see how many grants go to universities from specific agencies within Cook County. Next slide. So I'm going to switch over now to the second bucket of funding that I mentioned. And this slide lists some non-governmental funding sources. These sources include public charities such as the American Cancer Society, independent foundations such as family foundations, corporate foundations, these are often nonprofit entities affiliated with a for-profit company, or community foundations such as the Chicago Community Trust. There are thousands of these organizations and no central source for searching the grant programs. So obtaining funding from non-federal sponsors often requires a good bit of research about the organizations and their funding programs. This process is sometimes referred to as prospecting. Next slide. So this slide outlines some of the characteristics of non-governmental grant programs. These programs are usually mission-driven and their focus can be very narrow in one area, or they may focus on a few select areas for funding. Their funding priorities are often focused on a programmatic area, population served, or geographic area. And these grant programs may or may not fund certain activities. For example, some nonprofit funders will not fund research, but instead fund direct services such as health clinics. Many non-governmental funders require an invitation to apply or have a process where a letter of intent is required for review before they will accept an application. Ways to learn about non-governmental funders include visiting the organization's website, subscribing to their newsletters, which I find very helpful, and networking, which is a good way to learn more. I think it's especially helpful to discuss funders with colleagues who may have funding from a funder that you are interested in learning more about. Next slide. So across all sources of grant funding, it's important to find the right fit. Honing in on agencies or organizations that have the greatest likelihood of funding your work will help you be successful in your funding search. And it's important to be proactive when searching for grants. So I like to think of it like searching for an apartment or house. It's possible, but unlikely the first place you walk into is going to be the one. And I think that this quote that I shared here is spot on about the grant search process. So the same article where I came across that quote lays out a 5-step roadmap for searching for the right fit and applying for grants. It's very straightforward, but I think it's helpful to recognize that there are more than 2 steps in the process. So you think, I'm going to find a grant and I'm going to apply, but actually there's a little bit more to it. So the 5 steps are to prioritize your funding needs and your organization's capacity to manage funding. Do the basic research, which might include search engines and a quick glance before maybe bookmarking a funder. And then do a deeper dive, which might include a closer read of the priorities and requirements of the funder, or searching for past awards on a website such as usaspending.gov. Cultivate relationships, which might be a relationship with the funder, if that's something that they offer as an opportunity, or a relationship with colleagues who have experience with that funder. Apply with a strong application. Sometimes this comes down to being in the right time and place, but if you've done some of the groundwork getting to know the funder expectations or collecting some of the commonly requested information in advance, you'll be more prepared to respond when the time is right. Next slide, please. So as you go through the process of considering grant funders that would be a good fit for your organization, I've noted some things that you can think about here. The first important question is, what do you want to fund? Is it a specific program or project, or will it be operations? And I will just mention that operations can be something that is difficult to find funding for, as some funders do not fund operations. How do your organization's mission and activities align with the funder interests? So this is really important because, as I mentioned in the previous slides, funders really focus on their specific area of interest or expertise. So you really want to make sure that your organization's interests align with the funder's interest. Another question to ask is, how much funding do you need for a successful outcome? So sometimes I'm looking for funding and I see an opportunity that looks really great, but when I look at the amount available, the amount may not be feasible for the project that we want to pursue based on my experience with how much that project costs. What is your organization's capacity to manage the grant? So I may see a grant opportunity that offers a lot of funding, but oftentimes a large amount of funding comes with a very high burden for managing that funding. So that's something that you want to look at and say, do I have enough financial people? Do I have the project managers? Do I have the staff or the facilities to manage this funding? Your funder is going to look at that as part of your application. And to be competitive, you need to be able to offer that capacity to manage the funds. And then, is your organization eligible? This is an important question, and you'll hear me mention it multiple times. But as an example, if the funding is only available to 501c3 nonprofits, you need to make sure that you can fulfill that requirement. Next slide. So we've covered the first two sections of the presentation, and I'm going to check in with the participants here really quickly with two questions. You can put your answers in the chat if you'd like, or you can just answer them in your head. So the first question here is, if you are looking for government grants to support a program focused on improving health, what agencies might be a good fit? So select all that apply, and I'll give you a second to answer. Okay, so for this one, I would choose B, C, and E, the three health agencies. However, this is somewhat of a trick question. Depending on the project focus, all of these agencies offer health-related grants. For example, if I have a project that looks at lead dust in housing and health, HUD, or the Department of Housing and Urban Development, might be a good fit. Next slide. So this is our second question. A university receives a federal grant from CDC. The university provides a sub-award from this grant to a community nonprofit organization. What is this funding arrangement sometimes referred to? Okay, and I will go ahead and answer. This one is B, pass-through funding. Now we're going to move on and talk about some search
Ahora vamos a pasar
and applicant requirements. Next slide. So I usually decide where I might search based on the type of funding that I'm searching for. For federal funding, there is a website where you can search all federal grant opportunities. It's called grants.gov. If you're searching for contract opportunities, those are available on a different website called sam.gov. This presentation is about grants, so I won't go into more detail about that, but I did want to note the two different platforms. So another good place to search for federal funding can be on the agency websites. Some agencies have their own search tools or pages, and others will link you back to grants.gov. However, the sites are worth checking out in case there is more extensive information beyond what is given in the listing on grants.gov, or sometimes the agency site can be easier to search. So for example, the NIH site is easier to search than the grants.gov site. So I strongly recommend getting familiar with the various agencies that are related to your programmatic area. Next slide. So this is a screenshot of the grants.gov landing page. Once you are on the site, you can search for and apply for federal grants. Registration is free, and once you have registered, you can subscribe to informational emails and updates to specific opportunities. Next slide. This is a screenshot of the search feature on grants.gov. You can use the left-hand menu to filter by eligibility or agency. I also like to use the drop-down at the top to limit the results to those that were posted in the last 1 to 2 weeks and then sort by agency. It's a nice way to stay on top of the funding opportunities as they come out. Just a note, the keyword search is a bit finicky. So when I tried it the other day, I looked at the search tips on the side and found those very helpful for narrowing down the keyword searches. Go to the next slide. Okay, sorry, stay right there. When you click on a grant that you're interested in, you will see a listing page that has some basic information. Items to note here are the deadline, amount of funding, number of awards, and eligibility. To view the full call for applications or notice of funding opportunity, which is also referred to as the NOFO, click the Related Documents tab. The opportunities are usually a file download with several pages, so that's kind of your endpoint that you're looking for in order to find the full call for proposals. Next slide. Okay, so moving along from federal search tools, other government entities also have their own search tools. I've listed the Illinois Catalog of Financial Assistance. It's nowhere near as sophisticated as grants.gov, but it's a place to search across multiple state agencies. I find the weekly email list to be very helpful to see what's been posted and easier than trying to navigate the full list. Like federal agencies, some state agencies have their own grant sites, and I've listed a few here. Next slide. So Cook County and City of Chicago also have search tools or sites, and same as the federal and the state agencies. Individual agencies may also have their own listings. I believe you'll hear more about City of Chicago opportunities later today. So next slide. In addition to government funding search tools, I've listed a few options for searching for non-governmental grants. As I mentioned, the funding landscape is very broad, so it may take some trial and error to develop a good strategy for your organization. There are some options that require a paid subscription. These often have free trials to see if they might work for you. Looking on foundation websites and keeping a list is also a helpful way to search. I find signing up for email lists especially useful as a way to passively search. So I don't have to remember like where was the site or go and log in every day or every week. Usually the opportunities will just come across to me when they're posted on the website. Philanthropy News Digest, which is listed here as well, is a free listing of calls for applications. It's limited because it's not a search tool and funders have to choose to post here, but it's a good way to get familiar with seeing calls for proposals from nonprofit organizations and a way to start bookmarking some to come back and visit later. And then lastly, I'll just mention that modifying web searches to limit the site to an address ending in .gov, .edu, or .org can also be an easy, free, and effective way to search. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk about understanding grant applicant requirements so that you can be prepared once you do get to the point of applying for an application. Next slide. So when you find a funding opportunity that you're interested in, it's really important to read it closely and make sure that you can fulfill all of the requirements that are written in the text or linked in the text of the funding opportunity. Requirements that you should look for before you get too far along in the process are eligibility, either the type of applicant or the number of applications. If you're not sure if you're eligible, it's always important to seek clarification early on. Deadline, is the deadline realistic, or are there multiple deadlines? Is there an earlier deadline and a later deadline? the purpose and overview. Is this a good match for your organization and your organization's mission or goals? Budget limit, is this feasible? So we talked about that earlier, but is the amount of money available something that will help you do your project or program and be successful in what you are promising to do? Cost share and matching requirements. So if these are high, can your organization make the match? So I have definitely seen opportunities that looked like something that we would be interested in, but we had concerns about whether we could meet matching requirements. And then required applicant qualifications and capacity. Do you meet the requirements for capacity to manage the funds? One of my favorite tips of all time that I heard on another presentation is to use the keyboard command, Control F, to search for the words must and should. You can even do this and make a checklist to see if you meet all of the requirements mentioned with the words must. Also look for things that are not allowed. For example, some grants don't allow for construction or renovation costs. If building out space was an important part of your plan, it might not be a good match for you. Generally, there is no deviation from the requirements laid out in the funding opportunity, so you want to make sure that you understand all of the requirements clearly and that you can fulfill all of those requirements. Next slide. So for federal grants, all applicants are required to be registered in SAM.gov and obtain a unique entity identifier, or UEI. This was previously referred to as a DUNS number and recently changed within the last couple of years. So if you had a DUNS number already and were registered in grants.gov, then you most likely now have a UEI in SAM.gov. If you did not have a DUNS number previously in registration in SAM.gov, then you would need to get a new registration with a UEI in SAM.gov. The registration process can take time, so it's important to start this early if your organization plans to apply and does not already have a UEI. Also, the UEI is required for pass-through funding. So even if you are not applying directly to the federal agency, you may need it for your application to the pass-through entity. Some federal agencies may require additional registrations or accounts on top of the SAM.gov registration. As an example, NIH requires registration in their ERA Commons. In order to get the ERA Commons registration, you have to have the SAM.gov registration first. So the takeaway here is that if you plan to apply for federal funding, these items need to be addressed in advance and not at the time of the application. Okay, next slide. I think I might have skipped one. Go back to the, oh, right here. Okay. Sorry. So as I mentioned, you had it right, yeah. As I mentioned, the pass-through funding requires a UEI in SAM.gov. Some government organizations may require this or other registrations. So the state of Illinois requirements are linked here, and you'll see that they require the SAM.gov registration as part of their pre-qualification step. Non-governmental funders use a variety of application systems, and while you may not know their registration requirements in advance, they generally take less time for registrations than the government systems. However, it's always a good idea to take care of any registration requirements as the first step of preparing an application. There can be issues that need to be troubleshooted in advance as you're setting up your application in the system. So across funders, there's some common organizational information that you can expect to be asked for. If you plan to apply for grants, it may be helpful to collect some of this information in advance, or at least know where to find it easily. This information includes things like tax ID numbers, legal name of the organization, signing official for the organization, audits, financial reports, and a description of the organization mission, capacity, and resources, including the location and facilities. And this is one of my favorite memes of all time here on the side. That's definitely been me, except maybe a little bit of smoke coming out of the ears, trying to figure out how to meet these requirements. Okay, so before we jump into some time for questions, and if we have time, a demonstration of grants.gov, I wanted to share that an important part of the grant search process is stepping back and asking the question, should we apply? So first, have we identified a funding opportunity? This seems like an obvious step, although I see people go without one. It's always important not to just go running into the grant process, but to really think, do I have a funding opportunity that's a good match? Have we determined that this opportunity looks like a good fit for the organization, and are we eligible? Can we fulfill all of the applicant requirements? So have we done that search for must and should and made a checklist and checked everything off that we need to do? Can we write and submit by the deadline? So it's not impossible to obtain a grant in 48 hours, but it's highly unlikely to be successful. And can we implement the program, manage the funds, fulfill the reporting requirements? And who will do these at our organization? So it may be helpful to make a chart of the things that need to happen and put names on the other side of the chart and make sure that we can do those things or that we can hire to do those things. If we can say yes to all of these things, then it's time to begin work on the application. So I have 2 questions to check in. The first question is, when reviewing a notice of funding opportunity or call for proposals, what are key elements to review? So select all that apply. So I would select A through C. It's important to check for the budget limit, the eligibility, and the deadline first thing before deciding to apply. The glossary may be helpful in understanding the requirements. And so I would certainly take a look at that in a closer read of the funding opportunity. Next slide. So what is the applicant identifier required for all federal grant applications? And the answer is C. And just a reminder, it is no longer the DUNS number, it is now the UEI. Next slide. So this is the last slide before I open the floor up for questions and also for a demonstration of grants.gov. These are some next steps that you can try on your own in order to get started for looking for grant funding. Try the different search tools such as grants.gov to search for federal grants. Research nonprofit foundations that offer grants by program, focus, population served, or geographic area. Create a list or table of links to websites that you want to revisit for future grant searches. And then start a folder to collect and save organizational information for applications such as your 501c3 letter or your tax ID. And it's important to note that grant seekers who are deliberate, methodical and strategic in their approach to funder research and to grant requests are more likely to succeed. So this is a process. It is not a one-time thing. It's something that you have to commit to doing every day, kind of like you would every day or every week, let's say, kind of like you would exercising, if you would like to be successful. All right, so I will open it up for questions first, and then once we've gotten through those, I can do a screen share of grants.gov.
So there is a comment in the chat that it does, it's important to check for active UEIs as it must be renewed annually. So I think they were just reiterating. But there is a question, is there any likelihood that small and or startup NPOs get funded from massive orgs like NIH or the Fed?
there is maybe not a likelihood, but there is a possibility. There are opportunities out there targeted towards smaller organizations. The EPA just put out in the last couple of years some funding opportunities that were targeted to community organizations or partnerships of a community organization and maybe a larger partner like a university. It's also very common to have a larger partner, such as a government entity or a university, partner with the smaller NGOs.
We do have time, so if there are additional questions, if you would like to raise your hand or add it to the chat, we'll be happy to answer them. Robin, you should have screen share ability if you want to walk through.
Okay, great, thank you. And could I just get a confirmation that you can see the screen with grants.gov shown?
I can see the screen.
Perfect, thank you. So this is the grants.gov landing page for their website. The search grants tool is located here in the top toolbar. Once you're on this page, you can use the keyword search or any of the filters on the left-hand side here. So we're going to start with a keyword search, and I'm going to do air pollution and health. So I mentioned earlier, the search has been a little bit finicky, so I'm being very specific and I'm putting quotation marks around air pollution. Otherwise, it's going to search for any opportunity that has the word air in it, which may give me too many results. I'm also going to take a look at the opportunity status here. Forecasted are opportunities that have not yet been posted. It means that I can't apply to them right now. They're not open, but agencies will sometimes let you know when things are coming out. So in this case, I'm going to remove the forecasted opportunities and only go with the posted opportunities. I'm going to hit search, which I think it narrowed already. And then I'm going to take a look and see if there's anything of interest. I find it helpful to use these sorting tools here. So I'm going to sort this by agency. What I see here is that I see a lot of USAID opportunities. I'm going to ignore those because those are international opportunities. I know that just from my previous searches, and I'm not looking for those. So I'm going to ignore those. And I'll take a look at this EPA opportunity here, Environmental and Climate Justice Community Change Grants Program. So I'm going to open that up. This is the landing page here. I can see that there's total program funding of $2 billion. Expected number of awards is 170. This is a really large opportunity. It was posted November the 21st, so this is fairly new. The closing date for applications is November 21st, 2024, so in a year. This tells me to see additional information eligibility for clarification. So that means I'm going to have to look for the funding opportunity to see who is eligible to apply. And then a brief description of this program is written here. If I want to find the full funding opportunity, I'm going to go to related documents. If there are multiple files, you can download the zip and it will download all of them at one time. If you're just looking for the opportunity itself, expand that table row, and then you should be able to see a .pdf or .doc file here that you can download. So I'll download that file. And then I'll open it, and this is the actual funding opportunity here, well, where I will find more information about how to apply. So as I mentioned, you can do Control F as a way to search for eligibility, for example. Because this was not listed on that page, we want to search here. You can see that community-based nonprofit organizations are eligible, or a local government in partnership with a CBO, a tribe in partnership with a CBO, or an institution of higher ed in partnership with a CBO. So you would need to be one of those entities in order to apply. This opportunity, as most federal opportunities are, has several pages on it. So you can skim it real fast, or you can do that Control F to search for must and should as a quick preview to what is required for the application. So I'm going to go back to the search page here. As I mentioned previously, one feature I really like is the date range feature. So if I want to see what was just posted in the last week, I can choose that and update the date range. And then I can sort by agency again and take a look at the agencies that I know that I'm interested in. So if I am a research organization, I may be interested in NSF, and I can see all of the NSF postings here. And then I can keep moving through and take a look also at the health agencies. For example, these are HHS opportunities here. Sometimes I will leave this unfiltered so that I can see anything that was posted recently in case there is something from an agency that I don't commonly apply to, but that might be of interest. However, I can also use the filters on the side here to filter this down to specific agencies. So there's an agency filter on the bottom right here. There's a lot of USAID departments, so you have to get through all those before you can filter some of the other agencies. So I'm going to keep scrolling here. I'm going to filter to all of the Department of Health and Human Services. I'll check that box. And it immediately narrows down my search to less. So I had to go back to the first page. But now I only see opportunities that are posted by the Department of Health and Human Services. Given the number of opportunities on here, that filter can be really helpful once you're familiar with the agencies that you're interested in. I can also filter by eligibility. So if I'm looking for opportunities that are only available to nonprofits having 501c3 status, then I can check that box. Just a note here that I would also recommend checking the box for unrestricted in case that 501c3 status designation hasn't been added to the application, but you would still be eligible for the unrestricted opportunities. So do maybe try a couple of combinations of boxes here if you're searching by eligibility. I'm going to switch now to the forecasted opportunities and show you what one of those looks like. So this is checking the forecasted box here. And I will open up one of these opportunities from the CDC. We can tell this is a forecasted opportunity from the note here in the corner. This is the date the opportunity was forecasted. So this one was just posted 2 days ago. This estimated post date is the date that the agency expects to list the call for proposals. This isn't set in stone, but it's a good estimate of when you can go back and look for that call for proposals. However, a really helpful thing about grants.gov is that once you have created a grants.gov account, you can subscribe to a forecast and then it will email you once it's been updated. So that's very helpful so that you don't have to remember to go back and check, especially when they don't make that post date. And then you're, checking every day and it's not there, but instead you'll just get that automatic email. This also will give you some information about the funding that's expected to be available or the expected number of awards. You can get a little bit of a feel sometimes for whether it might be something that you are interested in applying to. All right, so I will stop there and ask if there are any questions. And Judy or Maggie, how are we doing on time?
You're doing great on time, Robin. You have about 20 minutes left.
Oh, okay, lots of time.
Yes.
If there are no questions, I can also do a quick demonstration of USA.gov where you can search for awards that have already been made by federal agencies. So give me just a moment to pull that up and then I will share the screen again. And I will put the link in the chat in case anyone would like to do a search at the same time. Okay, so this is the USA spending.gov search page. And I will redo the search that I mentioned earlier in the presentation so you can see some of the options for viewing the search results. So I'm going to select the last full fiscal year. So we're currently in FY24, which means that won't be an entire year of funding. I'm going to filter this to the award type, grants. I'm not interested in block grants because those are typically not grants that are the kind that I could apply to. So I'm going to get rid of those. I'm going to get rid of formula grants too. So I'm going to stick with project grants or cooperative agreements, which are the type of grants that my organization can apply to. I'm not going to add an agency in here, but you can. And then for the location, I'm going to add United States first. Illinois, and then I'm going to go all the way down to the county level, but I could leave that at the Illinois level if I wanted broader search results. I'm going to add Cook County. You do have to click add filter here, or else it won't filter into your search results. I'm not going to select anything here right now, but if you want to only see the grants that were made to nonprofits, for example, you could select that. These are some other options that I'm going to skip for this search because I do want to have a robust set of search results. I'm going to submit the search. So as a reminder, we are looking at all of the project grants or cooperative agreements from the last full fiscal year that went to organizations in Cook County. This is a table of all of those grants. We can sort this by recipient name or by total. I'm gonna sort by name. There's 3,000 grants, so it's taking a minute to do that sort. Okay, so you can see these search results here. If you want to view a specific grant, you can click on the award ID. And this will show you that grant listing, the period, the amount of funding. And the program that it came from. So this was the Ryan White HIV/AIDS program. I'm going to close that tab. In addition to the listing of individual grants, you can take a look at a map. You can zoom in on that map. So this is by congressional district here, if you want to see the distribution of funding by congressional district. And then categories is probably one of my favorite ways to look at this information. So again, we're looking at all grants that came to Cook County. And if we want to know what organization made the most grants, it was the Department of Health and Human Services. You can also take a look at the sub-agencies, and we'll see here that the National Institutes of Health made the most grants, followed by the Health Resources and Services Administration, and then the Department of Energy and National Science Foundation. And looking at this, I would guess that there's a lot of university funding in these numbers based on the funders, NIH and NSF. Those tend to be funders that fund research. The Health Resources and Services Administration funds more service, as well as the Administration for Children and Families. Any questions or anything that you would like me to show you while I have the screen share up? So if there are no more questions or requests to share the screen with search tools, I think I will hand it back to the team. All right, thank you all. It's great to be here today.